Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhidamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. This is the third session on the subject of Advaita philosophy, and we already discussed certain important aspects of Vedanta. As I mentioned earlier, Advaita philosophy is not just a system of thought, it has got a very practical side in our spiritual life. First, we must develop certain qualities, attitudes, and approaches to life, which altogether may be called sadhana chatushtaya, the four important qualifications, like a proper understanding of what is real and what is unreal, then a sense of renunciation of worldly desires, and then self-restraint and control of the senses and mind, and a strong urge for spiritual enlightenment or spiritual liberation. Nitya nitya bhastu viveka ihamutra phala bhoga viraga samadhi sarka sambhati mumukshuttum. These are the four qualifications that Shankaracharya lays down in the Viveka Chudamani. It's called sadhana chatushtaya sampatti. And after one becomes extremely desirous of following the spiritual pursuit, one should try to study spiritual ideas which are helpful, read scriptures, listen to scriptural expositions, then should meditate on what he reads and what he understands, and he should try to internalize, and he should make it part of his thought system. It's called Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. These are the 7 qualifications. Now, today I am going to discuss certain important aspects of Vedanta, because Advaita Vedanta frequently has this great risk of being interpreted as a mere philosophical construct, just an idea, a concept, something that we believe in, something that we study. And this has become more of a problem because we try to understand Advaita philosophy the way we try to understand Western philosophical systems, like the philosophy of Kant or Hegel or J.S. Mill or Aristotle. This is one important thing that we have to bear in mind when we approach Vedanta. Shankaracharya makes this very clear. He says the ultimate reach of Vedanta is experience. Now this experience is again a very inadequate translation into English. What Shankaracharya says is Srutya Yuktya Swanubhutya. One should study the scriptures, should meditate on the meaning of scriptural statements, and use our reasoning power to understand, analyze, and to fully assimilate. And that's not enough. So just to learn and teach and speak of Vedanta is not enough. That is only a very, very small part of Vedantic scheme. The real goal is to go beyond ideas, beyond concepts, beyond philosophies, but to make it a part of our life, make it a reality in our everyday experience. So that is the real meaning of anubhuti. It's not experience that comes in a flash. It is something we call being and becoming. Now, that's why you find in the Upanishadic literature, in Shankaracharya's commentaries, there are many practical methods laid down. They are called Brahmopasanas. So they are sometimes called Vidyas. The word Vidya is used. Certain statements are very, very important, especially the 4 great statements called Mahavakyas. Each of the 4 Vedas, Rig Veda, Yajurveda, and Samaveda, and Atharva Veda, has got one Mahavakya. For example, Aham Brahmasmi is the statement that relates to our real inner illumination experience, we may call, mystical experience. So Aham Brahmasmi is the Mahavakya that comes in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the Yajurveda. Then we have Tattwamasi. In fact, that comes the first because that is the statement of instruction. If Aham Brahmasmi is a statement of experience, Tattwamasi, the statement of instruction, the Upadesha Vakya it is called. It comes in the Chandogya Upanishad in Samaveda. Then between these two, we have 2 Mahavakyas. Prajnanam Brahma, it comes in the Rig Veda, Aitareya Upanishad, and Ayamatma Brahma, which comes in the Atharva Veda in the Mandukya Upanishad. So these are the 4 important statements that actually take you through this path of spiritual journey and will eventually lead you to this internal mystical experience. When we experience that the reality, the spiritual reality, the divine principle is one all-pervading spiritual truth, and it is immanent in all of us, it is omnipresent everywhere. When you realize you experience an affinity with the whole world, you feel a unity and oneness, a sense of unity and oneness with the whole creation. So this is the real goal. It's called Sarvatma Bhava in the language of Shankaracharya's Bhashyas, where we feel one Atman that is within us. That Atman is everything in this world. Even as we proceed in this journey, as we grow further and further, move further and further in this spiritual road, we become more broad-minded, we become more harmonious, we become more friendly with our fellow human beings, we become more friendly with the whole creation, including nature. That's why in one of the Vedic statements, you find Dev Prithvi Antariksham Shanti, Dev Shanti, Antariksham Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Roshadaya Shanti, Vanaspadaya Shanti, Vishwadeva Shanti, and so on. You find let there be peace and happiness, joy and harmony everywhere. Dev Shanti, let there be peace in the high heavens, in the celestial regions. Let there be peace on earth and everywhere, in the valleys and mountains. Let the whole creation be in a state of peace and harmony. This sincere experience is the ultimate goal of this Vedanta philosophy. So that should be always kept in mind. Otherwise, Shankaracharya's Advaita philosophy often runs the risk of being interpreted as a mere philosophical concept. Frequently we forget that he is also the author of the greatest and most intensely devotional Sanskrit poetry. And he is also the one who made a statement in the Gita commentary that the highest devotion, the highest knowledge are actually the same at the experience level. Sri Ramakrishna in modern times taught the world. So in the Upanishadic literature you can find so many Brahmopasanas. Apart from these statements, there are Sadvidya, Akasha Vidya, Antaraditya Vidya, Prana Vidya, Param Jyoti Vidya, Bhuma Vidya. You find many Satyagama Vidya, Dahara Vidya, Madhu Vidya. There are many different types of Brahmopasanas, means different ways of meditating on the Supreme Reality to become mentally and spiritually fit for realizing the Supreme Truth as immanent in all of us and as omnipresent everywhere. And as we proceed further, eventually when we reach the goal, we will understand this Supreme Reality is the only absolute reality, everything else is relative. This Supreme Reality, this Atman, this Brahman, this Brahma Satyam, that's the first statement that we took up in the early sessions. Brahman is only reality. It is the only reality and it cannot be explained, described, verbalized, expounded or defined. It can only be experienced as our own inner being. It is beyond all pramanas, it is beyond all epistemological tools. It is called, Sarva Pramana Avati. It is the reality that remains the same in the past, present and future, in the waking, dream and deep sleep states. So it's Avasthatraya Abadhita, Trigala Abadhita. All these statements are made in the Vedanta scriptures. So that means this Brahman is the instrumental cause, it is the material cause, it is Nimitta Upadana Karana, as Shankaracharya puts it. And in his works you find, as he expounds his philosophy, you find he deals with various non-Advaitic arguments of other philosophers. Like Naiyayikas Utpattivada, Sankhya's Parinamavada, then Charvaka Sankhadavada, and different schools of philosophy. Now, what we are going to discuss today is something very significant. The subject before us today is, what does Vedanta mean in our life? It means, how do we approach life and world in the light of Vedanta? The old statement is Brahma Satyam Jagad Mithya. Now, Brahma Satyam, Brahman is only reality that we already described. One absolute reality, Atman. Now, what about the gods and goddesses whom we worship in our temples, different places of worship? Shankaracharya says it's perfectly okay, all right. One unique aspect of Vedanta is it accommodates, it accepts, it recognizes, it honors all possible, conceivable views, approaches, and attitudes toward religion and God. But he says you have to go beyond that. Advaita doesn't deny anything. It doesn't reject anything. It doesn't say that something is wrong, you are wrong, you have to go for something that is correct. Swami Vivekananda, in modern times, articulates this view in a very powerful statement. He says, we are not traveling from error to truth, but we are traveling from truth that's lower to truth that's higher. That is, no one is rejecting anything. That is one of the unique aspects of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. He never rejects anything. He never repudiates anything. That's why in the Gospel you find a beautiful analogy, a beautiful parable. A woodcutter walking in the thick forests heard a noise from behind a tree. He was a poor man and he was not earning enough. So he had this problem. He was thinking, how can I make little more money so that I can look after my family better? So as he was walking in the thick forest, he heard a voice coming from behind a tree. So you go ahead. Charaiveti means go further ahead. And the story goes on. As he moved further, first he found a place full of sandalwood trees. He took away a lot of sandalwood and he became a rich man, which he sold to sandalwood trees, and he became a rich man. Then as he went further, he found a silver mine, a gold mine, and so on. This is how the story goes, the parable goes. There is a strong message behind the parable. In spiritual life, we should keep climbing the steps, going ahead. At the beginning of our spiritual life, we may think, well, I'm praying to God in my temple or in my place of worship. I'm reading the scripture, which is part of my religious tradition. So I'm okay now. That's perfectly okay. So every week, or maybe you have a shrine in your own home, you may go every day to the shrine. Or if you have a temple in the neighborhood, you may go every week and go to the temple. But it's wrong to assume that God lives in that temple alone or in that church alone. God's presence is there, but God's presence is not limited to that place. In the highest sense, God is present everywhere, because He is present as a divine reality in all of us, in everything. Now, to experience this is the ultimate goal. But we have to begin our education in the kindergarten, in the primary school. So we have to begin somewhere. But it's wrong to stop your education in the primary school or in the kindergarten. You have to go further and further. Now, according to Vedanta, all other religious concepts are so many ways, so many stages in our spiritual evolution before we reach this Advaitic experience. And when we reach this Advaitic experience, then you don't reject the world, but rather our interpretation of the world undergoes a change. We live in the world, we understand this reality, but if the slightest problem that we confront, immediately we are not shocked, because we know that everything in this world is bound to change. It is not eternal, it is not absolute reality. So this conviction of the relativity of every empirical experience, including maybe the loss of a job, maybe loss of money, even loss of health, all these happen as part of the unavoidable, inescapable drama that is human life. And that is what life in this world means in the empirical sense. Because our true reality is beyond this body, beyond the senses, beyond mind. Our true reality is the Atman within us. So this Advaita has got a tremendous practical significance. It has a healing effect. People sometimes think that the best way to preach religion is to tell you, you can be happy and joyful and you can be smiling 24 hours of the day and 7 days of the week. That's the goal of religion and spirituality. That's a very gross misinterpretation. The real purpose of spirituality and religion is the ability to look at pain and pleasure, the negative and positive experiences of life with the same equanimity of mind, because a continuous, unbroken succession of happiness is unthinkable in human life. That everyone knows. But still we want something like that. We know that every experience, every empirical worldly experience has got one positive side. It makes us happy for some time, but it could make unhappy. It could lead to unhappiness later. Just like two sides of the same coin. A coin cannot exist only with one side. If it has got happiness on one side, it has got unhappiness on the other side. So the ability to look at the whole thing as one empirical, passing, momentary experience and look beyond that, look beyond towards something that is permanent and to identify ourselves with that permanent reality. That's the only way to acquire healthy mindedness, that to acquire spiritual and mental health, to be able to live in this world. Now, here I am going to deal with some very gross misinterpretations of Vedanta. One, as I mentioned earlier, just a passing reference, is there's a feeling that Vedanta or Advaita Vedanta rejects the world. It tells you that the world is not real, so you should run away from the world, you should reject the world, giving it a very negative color. No, this is just the opposite of what Vedanta actually means. Vedanta doesn't reject the world. Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta doesn't reject the world. It accepts the world in its relative sense. So, sometimes this misunderstanding you can hear and read, that Vedanta says this world is like a mirage, it is like a dream, it is something that really doesn't exist, and so on. Actually, you'll be surprised when I tell you that Shankaracharya totally and completely not only rejects this idea of world illusion, but rather he asserts, he uses strong language to establish that this world is real, but real only in the relative sense. There is a view in Indian philosophy that the world is unreal, the external objects are unreal, but that view was put forward by Buddhist philosophers, mostly Vijnanavadins and Yogacara. They're the same name. They were called Yogacharas because they believed in some yoga practices, and they were called Vijnanavadins because they believed that Vijnanam or consciousness or mind is the only reality. External things do not have independent existence, independent of our meditation, our mental connection. That was the view put forward by Vijnanavadins. They are also called, as I mentioned, Yogacara philosophers. Lingavadara Sutram is there in one of the most important books. Asanga, Dignaga were some of the great philosophers who propounded this theory. And they also believed, of course, there are certain general principles about Buddhism. Buddhism has two stages in its philosophical evolution. I'm mentioning this because to understand Vedanta's approach to the world and life in the real, in this empirical world, we should know how Shankaracharya approaches a world negating theory propounded by Vijnanavadins and Shunyavadins. So the two schools of idealism that grew from 2nd century, maybe 1st century AD onwards was Shunyavada and Vijnanavada. Shunyavada was expounded by Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti and others. Nagarjuna was his original exponent. He articulates his Shunyavada views in this famous book. It's called Madhyamika Karika, O Moola Madhyama Shastra. And there he says, of course, Nagarjuna's view as being again wrongly interpreted, but the original view of Nagarjuna was that everything is based on dependent origination, equal Paditya Samudpada. As such, they do not have independent existence. Nothing in this world has independent existence. Everything is dependent. It depends for its origination. Therefore, it cannot be really called real or unreal. This indescribability was actually the original meaning of the word shunyata or shunya in the Nagarjuna's text. But what happened later on, this came to be wrongly interpreted as rejection of everything. In contrast to this, Vedanta tells you that this empirical world has a real existence. Everything is real. If we live in this world, we practice spirituality, we practice spiritual sadhanas, discipline, we realize God, we try to do a lot of good things, charitable work, karma yoga, and eventually we attain mental purity, and then we reach a point where we understand the relativity of all empirical things, including this world, including this body of ours, this mind, this intellect, and so on. So when you reach that state of spiritual experience, spiritual evolution, then you actually realize everything in this world comes and goes. They are not absolutely unreal, but they are not absolutely real either. It is only at the Vyavaharika standpoint that we can say the world is real. Means practical standpoint. From the standpoint of everyday experience, we know the world is real. We live in this world. But we also know that if you go deeper, if you analyze deeper, you understand, well, all that I cared for goes away. You make all the money, you'll work for 60 years in your life and make a lot of money, suddenly the money is no longer there. And even if you live and enjoy for 100 years, still after some time, after 100 years, this body disappears. So what we thought to be real, the money we cannot take with us, the wealth, the home, the job, all these we accumulate, but they won't be there in the distant future. And they did not exist in the distant past either. So they all live within time, not beyond time. But there is one reality that is beyond time. And when you think of that reality, the line of demarcation between the past and the present and the line of demarcation between the present and future do not exist. And that is only absolute reality. This is a state that you reach as a part of your spiritual evolution. It is not a concept that you believe in. You cannot say the world is unreal for me. Not only that, in Shankaracharya's Bhashya, there are statements, it is hypocrisy to say, before reaching that Advaitic mystical experience. It is wrong to say, it is hypocrisy to assert that the world is unreal and so on. This is a very important point to remember. So Advaita is the highest peak of spiritual evolution, and it is essentially a state of spiritual experience. It is not a philosophical construct. On the other hand, in total contrast to this, the Vijnanavadins as may call Yogacara philosophers another name, they are the subjective idealists. They believe that external things have no existence other than their impressions in our mind. If in fact Shunyavadins or Madhyamikas they were called, at least later Madhyamikas, they said that external things are totally unreal. Madhyamikas said. And they also did not accept any subject. Objects are unreal and there is no subject. Subjects also unreal. In contrast to this, the Mahayana Buddhist, the other school of Mahayana Buddhist means both Shunyavada and Vijnanavada belong to Mahayana tradition, of course. The Yogacara or the subjective idealists, they believe that there is one reality, that is mind, or Chittam they call. It's also called Vijnana. So they were called Vijnanavadins because they believed in the reality of mind. The Vijnanam was the name given to mind or Chittam. And according to them, this mind is nothing but a stream of different kinds of ideas. And that's the only reality. All external things appear actually outside the mind, outside our body as well as objects. And they are all mere ideas of the mind. So if you see a picture, a table, a chair, it is only an impression in your mind. The chair doesn't have objective reality apart from your perception of that chair. This is the view of the subjective idealist or Vijnanavadins. The existence of any external object cannot be proved, they said, because it cannot be shown that that object is different from the consciousness. So it is something very interesting, You see a chair, an object, and immediately the object is real to you. That's because you perceive it. If your mind doesn't perceive it, then it has no reality. Of course, this idea is being refuted by one of the one of the arguments put forward by Shankaracharya. The point is, if an object depends upon mind for its existence, then how is that the mind cannot create object at will? So they believe that ideas of different objects already are stored up in our mind. That's what they argue. And it's called Alaya Vijnanam, means a repository of expressions, imageries, impressions, ideas stored up in the mind. Now, to understand this, we should, of course, if possible, those of you who are interested can read the works of Asanga, Vasubandhu, Dignaga and others. Lankavadara Sutram is the original work is very profound, but it's available in English translations, I believe. So Vijnanavada philosophy is very important. In fact, in modern times, if you can believe that everything in this world is momentary and nothing that you see outside of mind really exists, everything is at a mental level, it's a very wonderful tool for psychological counseling, no doubt about it. But it doesn't give you a higher ideal to look forward towards. Vedanta, on the other hand, tells Vijnanavadins, Shankaracharya's Bhashya you find, it tells Vijnanavadins, you cannot reject the reality of external world. Because in the external world we eat food and we feel contented, we feel thirsty and we will drink water, our thirst is quenched. So These things happen in the empirical world. In fact, I can just read from Shankaracharya's own works. Philosophically, it is very important to understand the real implication of Vedanta in modern times. In this Brahma Sutra Bhashya, in the second chapter, there is one sutra, Na bhava upalabdhehi. What it means is, external objects are real, or rather, literally speaking, external objects have no non-existent existence. Means, external objects do have existence. Na abhavaha. It has no absence of existence. Means, it exists. Then the reason is given upalabdhehi, because we come to know those things. We know things in the external world. So there is this discussion. That is vijnana skandhamatram tu yujyate va na yujyate. This is subject of discussion. Vijnanam, that means chittam, mind, is the only reality. Everything, the external world, comes, emerges in the mind and disappears. Everything is momentary. So they are actually Vijnanavadins, they say, Yujyade Swapnadrishtanda Buddheva Vyaharatha. They say, actually, dream is an example. Because dream we see many things, but really they don't exist. That is the argument. This is the Vijnanavadins' argument put in the language of Shankaracharya's Sutra Bhashya. So, the subject of the sutra is, external objects are real in their relative sense because we know about them, so they cannot be said to be non-existent. But Vijnanavadins say they are non-existent because they are just like dreams. In dream we see different things, but those dream objects do not have any empirical reality. We immediately realize this. Now, in answer to this, Vedantins say, Abodha swapna vaishamyam bhagyarthastu bahirvat idite api yukti adadhihi artharupabhak, means external objects are not affected by the disappearance of dream objects, because dream objects and objects in the empirical world, in the waking stage, are totally different. They cannot be equated. Vijnanavadins say all things that we see are like dream objects. You see a chair in front of you, it's like a dream object. This is a Buddhist view, Vijnanavadins view. It's kind of subjective idealism. The chair exists only in your mind as an idea. Your mind is filled with these ideas. It's a repository of ideas. It's called Alaya Vijnana in their language. And because you have had previous experiences of seeing chairs, so you associate that memory with the external object you see in front of you. So you imagine there's a chair outside of mind, which is really not there. These objects have no real existence. They are like dream objects. Now you can imagine to what extent it is ridiculous to say that Advaita tells you that world is like a dream. Advaita does not tell you this world is like a dream. Like the Shankaracharya says, this world is not like a dream. Abodha swapna vaishamyam bhagyarthastu upalabhyate bahirvat idite api ukti nata na atadhi artharupa bhak. External objects, bhagyarthas, are not like swapna experiences, dream experiences. External objects in waking state do have a reality. Now, to assert this point further, Shankaracharya says, Evam prapte brumah na bhava upalabdhehi. It's called na bhava adhikaranam, na bhava upalabdhe. This is the sutra. In which Shankaracharya asserts his view, that not the Advaitic view, the Vedantic view, that external objects are not non-existent. External objects do exist at the empirical level. Upalabhyadehi pradipratayam bahya artha stambhaga kutyam ghata patayiti. Nacha upalabhyamana seva bhavo bhavidum arkhati yadahi kachit bhunjano bhujisadhyayam trupto swayam anubhuyamanayam evam bruyat naham bhunje navatapyami iti. So the example is given. Suppose you are seeing in front of you a pillar, a wall, or a pot, or a cloth, any of these things you see. You can't say, I don't see these things in front of me. Suppose you are hungry, you have a good lunch, and you don't say, I was not hungry, I did not eat anything. You can't say. Because what happens, the external world, is real in the empirical sense. Now, this is the real view of Advaita. The reason why I emphasize this point is, this is one of the gross misunderstandings about Vedanta. I mean, those who don't read Shankaracharya's original books, they will tell you that Vedanta say Advaita say this world is not real. This world is unreal. This world is unreal, that statement is made in many texts, but the real meaning of the statement is, this world is not absolutely real, but it is not absolutely unreal. It is not absolutely unreal. That point is emphasized again and again. So I am putting forward this idea because this is one of the gross misunderstandings which are common in modern times. Now, what significance does it have in our everyday life? On the one hand, this world is a golden opportunity for us to live, to do spiritual practices, to do good things, to improve our spiritual life, to evolve further in spiritual life. As Swami Vivekananda says, the world is a gymnasium to work out our karmas. In modern times, Swamiji articulates this view. This world is a gymnasium. A gymnasium is a place where you use certain instruments kept there to improve your health, to make your body stronger. But you don't stay there. So we should not imagine that the world is the ultimate goal of existence or spiritual evolution. It's only a via media stage. So now this idea that the world is unreal was unfortunately put forward by certain Vedantins, but not in the same way in which Vijnanavadins articulated, but in a different way. It is called the Drishti Srishtivada. This particular theory was put forward by a philosopher. His name was Prakashananda. He almost around 15th or 16th century he lived. He wrote a well-known book, Vedanta Siddhanta Muktavali, in which he said that creation exists only so long as it is perceived by us. So Drishti Srishtivada means Srishti or creation exists only when we have Drishti or perception of creation. It means the world is only a mental construction. It exists only in the mind. So the Vijnanavadin's view put forward by Asanga, Dignaga, Vasubandhu and others, and also in the earlier book of Linkavadara Sutra, was taken up and put in a different language. Of course, Prakashananda also was influenced by the teachings of Yoga Vasishtha and others. The unreality of the world can be justified in Vedanta only from the standpoint of the highest spiritual experience. When you are living in the constant awareness of the fact Brahman is only reality, everything else is relative or unreal, we are always living in that Brahmanishtha, the Brahma Bhava, then you can say, well, this world is unreal. Because from the highest standpoint of realization, the difference between relative reality and totally unreal things, that difference will disappear. But that's not true for an ordinary person, for an average person living in this world. But Prakashananda, he put forward this idea. That's because he wanted to defend Vedanta, because certain non-Vedantic thinkers like these philosophers of Madhva school, like Vyasatirtha, Jayatirtha, Vaditirtha and others, they try to falsely interpret Vedanta as Mayavada, forgetting that it is really Brahmavada. So they said Maya as an equal categorical reality, ontological reality in Vedanta. So Vedanta becomes Advaita. Advaita becomes Dvaita if you accept the ontological reality of Maya also along with the reality of Brahman. But the fact that Shankaracharya said Maya is anirvachaniya, it is anadi, but is santa, it is something that feels like it's existing only when you are in a state of ignorance. When we come out of ignorance, we understand Maya is actually unreal. But these ideas were totally forgotten, and then in the dialectical confrontations between Madhvas and Vedantins, one of the Vedantins, this name as I mentioned, Prakashananda, who wrote this well-known book, Vedanta Siddhanta Muktavali, he articulated this idea, Drishti Srishtivada, which is actually a deviation from Shankara's original Vedanta philosophy. So, the idea contained in Drishti Srishtivada may have existed in works like Yoga Vasishtha and Adhyatma Ramayana, etc. But they are not full-fledged philosophical texts like Shankara's commentaries. They contain so much of Advaita, so much of idealism, but they are not organized as a compact philosophical system. Because of that, this idea was taken from Yoga Vasishtha by Prakashananda. So he says, Vedanta Sara Sarvasum Ajneyam Adhunataneihi Asheshena Mayoktam Tat Purushottama Yatnataka. So we should remember the idea that Advaita rejects the world, Advaita looks upon the world as a dream, is alien to the original teachings of Shankaracharya, who is the original exponent of Advaita philosophy. So you find in Advaita Vedanta a blend of, a harmony of both the realism and also idealism. Those who cannot understand the highest philosophical doctrines, they can practice prayer, they can practice meditation, they can practice worship, puja, rituals and so on. And that will slowly take them to a state of spiritual evolution where they will be able to understand the real destination of our spiritual journey. That is Advaitic experience. Again, it is not a philosophical conviction, but an experience. And when you get experience, you don't ask questions, you have no conflicts, you are free from all questions and doubts. So this is what you call the real Vedanta of Shankaracharya. We will continue the discussion in the coming sessions. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.